Something unfamiliar is closing in, quietly but unmistakably. Lately, reality has felt like it's been slipping through the seams, hasn't it? The sense of being disconnected from everything once known, routines, rhythms, even the sense of self, has grown louder. Not in a dramatic, chaotic way, but like a song heard underwater. Muffled, distant, impossible to grasp. This Jun moon hasn't even peaked, and yet its influence is already rearranging inner landscapes. What used to ground the spirit now feels like a vague echo, and in that strange vacuum, a question begins to form, one that can't be ignored for long. Is something truly wrong, or is something hidden beginning to surface? There's a strange kind of solitude in moments like these. It's not isolation in the literal sense. Plenty of faces still pass by, plenty of conversations still happen, but none of it touches the core, like a signal that's gone out of phase. And if the sensation has started to feel unnervingly specific, like a sudden drop-off in purpose, or the haunting feeling of being out of sync with time itself, then it might be worth considering whether this is a personal crisis or part of a much larger recalibration already underway. Ever felt like everything familiar is dissolving so that something deeper, older can finally speak? What's coming next might just be the missing piece you didn't know you were looking for. Hit subscribe because the next message wasn't meant to be missed. Here's where it starts to get interesting. When purpose disappears, it often means identity was built on something too small. And maybe that's what's happening now. Not a collapse, but a reorientation. The compass isn't broken, it's being magnetized to a new kind of north. One that can't be explained away with affirmations or routines. It needs stillness, discomfort, and maybe even a touch of disillusionment to be heard. And that's exactly where this moon is pulling everything. So, what if forgetting who one is exactly how remembering begins? Something subtle but undeniable is shifting beneath the surface. Lately, there's been a strange magnetism pulling everything inward, a quiet, almost primal impulse to step out of reach. Not to escape, but to reset the circuitry. The desire to go silent, to vanish from timelines and calendars, to fold in on oneself like a tide pulling back before the surge. It doesn't come from fear. It emerges from a deeper place, the kind of place that only wakes up when the old patterns have worn thin. Maybe the question isn't why disappear, but what part is asking to dissolve? Under this full moon's influence, something buried begins to stir. Not loud or dramatic, but persistent, like an inner vibration that no longer syncs with the surrounding noise. There comes a moment when every role, every title, even the version of self that once felt genuine, begins to feel like a borrowed shape. That moment, as uncomfortable as it is, marks the beginning of something unnameable waking up. The urge to walk away isn't sabotage, it's a sacred form of surrender, a kind of pause that clears the air for what's trying to be born. This phase isn't about disappearing into absence. It's about shedding the weight of the known to make space for something more honest. When the instinct to go surfaces, it isn't rejection, it's renewal. The spiral inward is part of the preparation, part of the rewiring. The part that once performed is being unhooked from the stage. And no, this isn't a fall, it's a return. One that doesn't go back, but deeper. So ask, when the noise fades, what voice still speaks beneath it all? That's the one that's stepping forward now, even if no one else sees it yet. Right at the edge of release, just when the signal to withdraw grows strong, the most carefully designed distractions tend to appear. Not loud, not obvious, elegant. They arrive wrapped in timing that feels uncanny. A message from someone long gone, an invitation that stirs nostalgia, an opportunity that seems handcrafted by fate. But underneath that polished surface lies something more complex. This isn't a gift, it's a gravity well. And the moment it appears, the internal narrative kicks in. Maybe this is the sign, maybe the cycle is finally breaking. But what if it's not breaking at all? What if it's looping? If something inside you felt still while watching this, it means you're aligning. Subscribe and stay close, because the transmission continues. There's a reason this particular lunation feels like smoke in a mirror. It doesn't just illuminate, it refracts. It creates copies of desires, dressed up as completions. A kind of false resonance is at play, one that mimics inner clarity but lacks the weight of true alignment. It whispers in familiar tones, presses on the softest scars and calls it healing. That strange sense of déjà vu. Ever felt that when something re-enters life under just the right light? That's no accident. It's precision seduction. And the question that matters most here isn't whether the thing is appealing. It's whether it respects what's been outgrown. True discernment often arrives not as certainty but as friction. A low inner resistance that cuts through the seduction of aesthetics. That tiny internal edge, where logic can't fully justify the no, but soul refuses the yes. That's where the real test unfolds. This moon isn't asking for desire to be denied. It's asking whether desire has matured. Can a pattern be spotted even when it shows up in silk? And when the moment comes, would silence be chosen over seduction? That's where the transformation anchors. Not in the leap forward, but in the refusal to fall back. Something has shifted in the way perception works, and not in the usual abstract, mystical sense. This full moon seems to be pulling awareness out of the symbolic and into something far more visceral. It's no longer about messages from dreams or signs and numbers. What's emerging feels older than thought, like a dormant sense waking up beneath the skin. There's a rawness to it, a kind of sensory intelligence that operates just below language. It's the subtle recoil at a smile that doesn't match the eyes, or the quiet tension felt in a space that looks perfectly fine on the surface. And the strangest part? It isn't imagination, it's signal. This isn't intuition as it's typically understood. It's more like an ancient mechanism flicking back on, something bone deep. There may be moments when a certain scent appears from nowhere, a memory without a source, or a sound almost imperceptible might anchor the whole body into alertness. None of it adds up logically, and that's exactly the point. The center of knowing is relocating, from the mind's interpretations to the body's responses. And when traditional tools stop working, when the symbols go quiet, when the rituals don't land, could it be that the compass hasn't broken, but evolved? If inner clarity now feels like it's buried under distortion, it's because the guidance system has shifted forms. This sensation has a name, though not in language most are taught to recognize: spiritual amnesia, a deliberate forgetting, not a flaw, not a malfunction, but a soul-level reset button. Imagine the feeling of standing at the edge of a stage after the curtains close and the script disappears. That's the territory this moon is pulling everything into. The old story isn't being erased because it was wrong. It's being archived because it's complete. And in this middle space, the tendency is to panic, to grasp for what once fit, even if it now feels paper thin. But what if the clarity isn't missing? It's simply not arriving in the old ways. This is the still point between identity and integration, the echo chamber before the next truth has found its voice. It's a sacred disruption, even if it doesn't feel that way. And yes, it can get emotional. One moment filled with longing for something intangible, the next restless for a future that hasn't even begun to articulate itself. But this emotional volatility isn't instability, it's movement. The system is reorganizing, preparing to root itself into something more aligned, more authentic. So ask, is it possible that this temporary confusion is the cost of growing into something too big for the old map to contain? And if so, what happens when forgetting becomes the first form of remembering? If you felt something here, like it was meant just for you, maybe it was. Subscribe. No need to explain it, just stay. Something has already been set in motion, quietly, precisely, and without the need for conscious permission. Under the weight of this full moon, a kind of invisible signature has been offered and accepted. It didn't happen in a boardroom or on a timeline. It happened in a space most minds can't reach, but most souls recognize instantly. That sudden urge to turn left instead of right, to send a message that feels out of character, or to walk into a moment with no clear reason, these aren't whims. They are echoes of a pact already made, now rippling into awareness. This lunar phase isn't simply illuminating, it's activating. And its activations don't always announce themselves. Some arrive disguised as restlessness or an unexpected sense of direction. Others show up as an unshakable pull towards someone, someplace, or something that seems unrelated to current goals. But underneath it all is a current. Not a push, not a command, something subtler like gravity. A version of the self, perhaps in a state beyond memory, already agreed to what's unfolding now. And this self, standing here in the middle of the story, is only just beginning to catch the scent of that agreement. What's wild is how tangible it starts to feel. That tap on the shoulder to show up when retreat was easier, or that internal clock ringing for no reason. These aren't mistakes. They are alignments fulfilling themselves. And no, not everything will come with explanation. In fact, most of it won't. But absence of logic doesn't equal absence of meaning. So maybe it's worth asking, if a part of the path was chosen before the waking self was ready, would it still feel real enough to trust? Because if recent moments have felt strangely choreographed, if every interaction carries the weight of a consequence not yet understood, then maybe, just maybe, the unseen hand has already made its move. There's a strange kind of intelligence in stillness, one that resists the mind's craving for maps and metrics. In moments like this, when everything internal seems scrambled and the external offers no coordinates, the default impulse is to act, to fix, to figure it out. But this moon, thick with energetic density, isn't asking for movement. It's asking for disappearance. Not disappearance in the literal sense, but an energetic vanishing, a melting of frameworks and self-definitions that no longer serve. The thinking mind, desperate to maintain grip, Jun interpret this as failure. But what if the truth is that control itself is the veil? In this space, clarity becomes irrelevant. The compass doesn't spin because there's no direction yet, only expansion. What's unfolding is not a lesson, not a task, but a recalibration at the level of being. It feels like standing in a room where all the walls are dissolving at once, while some part of the psyche insists they must be rebuilt immediately. But this is not the time to reconstruct. It's the time to feel. The fog, though maddening, is sacred. And it isn't a test of endurance, it's a container for gestation. The mind Jun scream about lost purpose or broken timing, but none of that holds weight here. Progress in this space looks like surrender. It's natural to want relief, to grab a book, light something, search for signs, chase meaning. But maybe that's exactly the instinct that must soften now. Maybe what's needed is not more stimulation, but the courage to let the silence remain untouched. Think about that. How often does silence get honored without being filled? The dissonance being experienced is not dysfunction. It's the unfamiliar echo of identity dissolving. And in that echo, something new waits, not loudly but patiently. So perhaps the only true act in this chapter is non-interference. No reaching, no resisting, just witnessing. Because transformation doesn't arrive with trumpets. It arrives in the quiet, long before it makes sense. And by the time it's understood, the version of the self who asked for clarity will already be gone. The return of clarity doesn't arrive like a spectacle. There are no cymbals crashing, no sky splitting open to announce the new frequency. It slips in through the unnoticed cracks, through breath that suddenly feels deeper, through mornings that begin without a question mark. That pressure in the chest, the one that used to speak in riddles, quietly evaporates, not because it's been decoded, but because it no longer needs to hold the message. There's no final lesson to unearth, just an absence that feels oddly complete, like silence that doesn't need filling. There is no homecoming to the former self. The landscape within has changed too much, and even familiar roads feel strangely artificial. Behavior patterns once used as anchors begin to feel like old coats, technically wearable but wrong in texture. The urge to resume an older rhythm Jun arise out of habit, but it doesn't last long. It's not rejection, it's recognition. A recognition that something vital has shifted. And if it feels like the old framework now carries the weight of irrelevance, it's because transformation occurred where no spotlight was pointed. Did you notice? This moon didn't offer a new map. It made the old one unreadable. It didn't broadcast wisdom. It stripped the need for interpretation. And now the quiet is different. Not dull, not passive, but weighted with presence. A clarity that doesn't compete for attention because it doesn't need to be heard to be known. No signs required, no permissions, just an innate sense of orientation that moves like instinct, but deeper. And what about those moments when something feels correct before logic can catch up? That's the signal now. Subtle, unapologetic, fluent. It can take others a while to notice. Conversations might feel slightly off-center. Familiar interactions June carry the residue of expectations that no longer match. The world around Jun respond to an older version, unaware that something irreversible took place in the stillness. And that's okay, because integration doesn't rush, it unfolds. And when someone eventually says, something's different about you, they're not wrong. But what they won't see is that the rewiring happened in the dark, without effort, without drama, under a sky that never asked for applause. For those still here, still present in the slow drift of this final breath in the conversation, thank you. It matters more than algorithms can measure. That presence like this still exists. That attention hasn't become extinct. This isn't just a video, it's a thread. One woven not with instruction, but with resonance. So if something stirred, if something settled, if some unseen layer of the self nodded along quietly, that means the current was shared. And in a world loud with distraction, that kind of still listening is no small thing. There's always more unfolding, more to be said, more to be uncovered in the shadow of the next shift. So if this kind of space feels like something worth returning to, feel free to mark it. Subscribe, share, echo back in the comments if something lingered. What has been spoken here doesn't end in silence. It lives on in those who felt it. Maybe in a phrase, maybe in a sentence that won't let go later tonight. That's the work. That's the signal. Let it ripple. Until the next turning, be well. Whatever that means for the moment you are in. Let the noise pass through. Let clarity stay close, even when quiet. And if this has been a kind of mirror, then Jun, the next reflection, reveal even more of what's been waiting to rise.